Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Namofsky. On today's episode, we're discussing eating disorders. Now, just before we went to break, we were talking about dieting. How do I know if my dieting is getting to a dangerous level?
So when people start dieting, they often have weight goals. So one sign of danger is if your weight goal keeps getting lower and lower. You reach your weight goal, you lose weight to a certain extent, and then you feel like, well, that's not enough. I need to lose another 5 pounds or another 5 pounds. So that's one warning sign. Another would be if you are purging. So if you're using vomiting, if you're using laxatives, or if you're misusing any other medication or drugs, whether they're over the counter or prescribed, that would be another warning sign of your dieting. If you're giving up many activities, such as avoiding eating or social isolating yourself socially for your dieting, that would be another warning sign. If you're finding that you're increasingly critical about your body, a lot of negative thoughts, a lot of body checking, that would be a warning sign. For some people, if you're getting a menstrual period and you lose your menstrual period, that would be another warning sign.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit there. So how do people develop eating disorders? What's the beginning of this? How does it all start?
So it's really important to know that it's multifactorial. There are biological, there are psychological, and there are environmental factors. It's a very biologically influenced disorder. We know that from gene studies, it's over 50% heritable. So it's not a choice. People are vulnerable because of biology and because of psychological factors, which we're also born with. We were born with a certain temperament. And then when you add on top of that vulnerability, also environmental stressors, such as trauma, such as substance abuse or family history of substance abuse, other types of illnesses, that can be a precipitant that leads to development of an eating disorder.
So, okay, so let's step back now. Who develops these eating disorders then?
That's another important factor, is that we used to think decades ago that it was a disorder that young women or people of higher socioeconomic status are the ones who develop. Now we know that it actually affects everybody. Men, women, doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter your socioeconomic status, doesn't matter your gender, your sexual orientation, your race, your ethnicity. It actually affects everybody.
So, okay, let's step back now. We talked about the three different types. How common are these eating disorders?
It's a lot common than we recognize. So in anorexia, it affects about 1% of women, about a third of that, 0.3% of men. Bulimia, about 1.5% of women, about a third of that percent, so 0.5% in men. And much higher with binge eating disorders, so 3.5% of women and about 2% of men. If you put that all together, it's about 5% of the population and even more.
That's a lot. So why is there such a focus on eating disorders?
It's important to recognize that it's not a lifestyle choice. It's also not about vanity, and that there's actually very severe impairment in a person's functioning. So, for example, being able to work, being able to go to school, being able to carry your everyday tasks. And also psychologically, it has a huge impact in terms of feeling of distress. Many people die of suicide because they're so distressed with their eating disorder, and also other comorbidities such as depression. Also, there are medical complications. So, as you can imagine, all our organ systems rely on food to function. Our brains can't function if we're not feeding our brains properly. If we're purging, we can have electrolyte abnormalities that can lead to heart attacks. So, that would be one of the biggest worries. We can have seizures. It can affect all our organ systems. We can have liver failure, kidney failure, longer term outcomes such as infertility and osteoporosis. So, we really worry about the medical complications of eating disorders as well.
Well, the list goes on, and I had no idea that. I mean, obviously, you're not fueling your body; it's going to shut down. But it ends up being such a domino effect for people. What happens if somebody, has an eating disorder? Is it easy to bring them back uh, after they've
It
gone through all
depends.
this trauma?
Yeah, it depends. So it depends on things like how old were you when you developed the illness. It depends on how long you've had it. So the longer you've had it, the higher risk of physical complications and also death. In fact, anorexia has a highest death rate out of all psychiatric illnesses. And we're comparing this to depression, to schizophrenia, to other mood disorders, to substance abuse. It actually has a highest mortality rate. We're talking 10 to 20% mortality rate over 20 years. So we bring people back by treating them early, so catching it earlier, making sure that people are getting treatment, having access to treatment, because the longer this goes on in your brain, the more entrenched the thoughts are, the more entrenched the behaviors are. So the earlier we catch it, the earlier we treat it, the more likely someone can fully recover. And actually, most people do fully recover. That's an important thing to know too.
That is great news. So when we come back, we're going to talk about, everyone seems to be on a diet. So why is it dangerous or is it not dangerous for you? So please don't go away.